Hi, I'm Dr. Cristina Saldana. I'm a bilingual speech-language pathologist, and this is case study number 1 of evaluations. Today, we're going to discuss a young Hispanic boy, 6 years old. He started preschool when the pandemic hit, so essentially he did not do preschool. He began kindergarten, and teachers knew he wasn't keeping up with his peers. Something was not quite right. But because the school can only retain a certain number of bilinguals, they decided to move him on to first grade. Now, in first grade, he did not make appropriate gains. So the team decided they would test him for special education. They were considering an intellectual disability. They were also considering a designation of significant developmental delay. So they asked me to come in. So they're starting out the year. He's repeating first grade. And I start out by giving him the expressive one word. Picture vocabulary test, Spanish, English, bilingual edition. And he scored a 91. Now, on a standardized test, when you score a 91, it's likely you don't have an intellectual disability. Our standardized tests are typically compared with standardized psych tests. So this is a pretty good indication that he does not have an intellectual disability. The next thing I did was I administered the test of auditory processing skills. And I did this because I first interviewed him. I noticed he was moving a lot. And these are the questions I asked him. I said, do you feel like your brain sometimes doesn't work? And he said, no, that it works. It's sad. He said, my brain is sad. I said, do you sometimes cry? He said, yeah. So why? Because I'm being in trouble. I said, why do you get in trouble? He said, because I pull my sister's hair. I say bad word, but the teacher hear it. She get mad at me. When I go outside and be rude to people. I said, do you think you're rude? He said, not really, just a little bit. Very honest. I said, is it hard for you to stay still? He said, yeah. I stand up, play around, move in my chair, push people in the playground. Guys, a student who has an intellectual disability at 6 years old cannot have this conversation and would not know how to answer these questions. I said, do you want help to behave better? He said, yeah. I said, do you move a lot? He said, yep. I said, do you get angry a lot? He said, a little bit at home. I said, do you feel tired at school? He said, yep, every day. And I asked that question because he yawns a lot. Now, keeping that in mind, I gave him the test of auditory processing with some reservation, with caution. But even that, on that, he scored a cohesion index of an 80. 80 is low average. That is not a significantly low score. We have to be careful when we're giving students who we suspect may have ADHD the TAPS, the test of auditory processing skills, because they might score low, not because they have a true auditory processing deficit, but because they have symptoms of ADHD that could interfere with how they perform on this test. So we have to be careful with that. Let's see what else. So then at this school, we have the self for Spanish. So I decided to give him that one, even though we do have other bilingual tests we can administer. It available to us, but in this particular school, we have the self for. So on the sentence structure subtest in Spanish, he scored a 7 scaled score, which is average. I did not proceed with the other subtest because he was begging to do it in English. He wanted to respond in English, so I respected that. So I said, fine, let's do the English first. Let's do the English. Now, on this one, he scored a receptive language score of 80, expressive language 80, language structure 80. His core language overall was an 80. Now, I want you guys to understand something. this child, when a child scores 85 and above, we know that they are average, within the average range. But what we're not always taught is that scores within the low average range are okay too. And read your manuals, because some manuals indicate that an 80 and above is considered low average and is acceptable. Sometimes a 79 is acceptable. And to us, we're trained to say, no, it has to be 85 and above. But guys, read your manuals, because when it comes to bilinguals, we need to know how we're interpreting these tests, the test scores. I called mom for an interview because I thought it was interesting, the responses I was getting from this little boy. And when I called mom, I said, Mom, tell me, was your pregnancy normal? Was delivery okay? He left the hospital with you. Something a lot of us miss asking, and I want you to always ask no matter what. Did your child have ear infections? And she said, yes. And parents don't know to say this. They don't think that's important. It's not their fault. And she even said that he got tubes placed bilaterally at age 5, which means when he was trying to learn in kindergarten, he was just trying to survive with these ear infections and tube in his ears. That could have led us to maybe have him repeat kindergarten versus first grade, right? I mean, there's so many implications here. She even said that she's very concerned about his high activity, his hyperactivity. He's impulsive, and he's just like his dad, and she believes that it's hereditary. So she said that she had called the doctor, she went to the pediatrician, they gave her a referral, but she has not been able to find a specialist who speaks Spanish to diagnose him with ADHD. So I talked to the psychologist. She said she did give a rating scale for ADHD. Mom filled it out. None of the scores were significant. So then I questioned, well, was it in her native language? And 2, did she really understand the questions? So now I have to go back to my team and decide what we should do. No scores here indicating a language disability. They are indicating a weakness, but not a disability. So with these scores, we cannot even pursue significant developmental delay through communication. Maybe they have information in another area of development, but we don't have it for communication. My scores do not indicate an intellectual disability. So I want to ask the team if they would consider a second measure of ADHD to see if those scores come out differently. And if he does get a diagnosis of ADHD, we might be able to do a 504 plan. Or if his academics are so low, maybe we can give him an IEP under OHI, other health impaired, with an ADHD diagnosis, and provide academic support that way with accommodations. I don't know. I would love your advice. Let me know what you think. We have a huge number of minorities in this country who are placed in special education. We as team members, we need to be on the same page across the nation. How are we deciding who is and who isn't eligible for special education and who does and doesn't have a disability in communication? We need to be on the same page. So, guys, consider if test scores are 85 and above, we know they're average, but for bilinguals, 80 and above should be considered adequate or within average. And read your manuals, because sometimes 78, 79 is still considered low average. We have to be careful how we're interpreting these test scores. So I thank you for your attention. Please comment if you have any suggestions for me. I get a ton of questions from the public. So if you have more questions and we can present more cases, that would be great. But I want us to start a movement. We need to really change how we are providing services for our bilingual babies. Thank you for listening.